The tension in the Newsmax studio was thick enough to cut with a knife. Bill O'Reilly, the 74-year-old veteran broadcaster, sat behind the polished desk with his signature smirk, completely confident he was about to demolish another young Democrat politician. What he didn't expect was that Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett had come prepared with ammunition that would turn his own words into weapons against him. "Ladies and gentlemen," O'Reilly began, his voice dripping with condescension, "we're here with Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, who thinks she can lecture America about justice while having zero real accomplishments in her brief career." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Crockett, sitting across from him in a sharp burgundy blazer, didn't flinch. Her dark eyes locked onto O'Reilly's with the intensity of someone who had been underestimated her entire life. What happened next would leave O'Reilly scrambling for words and create the most explosive political moment of the week. The 33-year-old freshman congresswoman was about to deliver a response so devastating that it would trend on every social media platform within minutes. Before we dive into this incredible showdown, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss these jaw-dropping political moments. Trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next. The stage was set for what would become one of the most memorable political confrontations in recent memory. O'Reilly thought he was interviewing another rookie politician he could easily intimidate. He had no idea he was about to face someone who would flip his own playbook against him. Bill O'Reilly had built his career on being the guy who asked the tough questions. For decades, he dominated cable news as the host of The O'Reilly Factor on Fox News, where he perfected the art of interrupting guests and talking over anyone who disagreed with him. His catchphrase, "No spin zone," became legendary, even though critics argued he spun stories harder than anyone else in media. At 74, O'Reilly still commanded respect from conservative audiences despite the controversies that ended his Fox News career in 2017. Sexual harassment allegations and massive settlement payouts had forced him out of prime time, but he rebuilt his brand through podcasts, books, and occasional guest spots on networks like Newsmax. His ego remained as large as ever, and he still believed he could dismantle any opponent with his aggressive interview style. O'Reilly had a particular disdain for young Democratic politicians, especially women of color who he felt were all talk and no substance. He saw them as easy targets, inexperienced politicians who crumbled under pressure from a seasoned media veteran. His preparation for this interview had been minimal because he assumed it would be another routine takedown. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett represented Texas's 30th district and had quickly become one of the most dynamic voices in the Democratic Party. At 33, she was young by Washington standards, but her path to Congress had been anything but easy. Born and raised in St. Louis, she had worked her way through college and law school, eventually becoming a successful civil rights attorney in Dallas. Her legal background was impressive. She had handled high-profile cases involving police misconduct and voting rights violations. Before running for Congress, she served in the Texas House of Representatives, where she gained national attention for her passionate speeches defending voting rights and criminal justice reform. Crockett was known for her sharp intellect and ability to cut through political nonsense with surgical precision. Unlike many politicians who spoke in carefully crafted talking points, she had a gift for explaining complex issues in ways that regular people could understand. Her social media presence was growing rapidly, with young voters particularly drawn to her authentic style and willingness to call out hypocrisy wherever she found it. What made Crockett particularly dangerous as an opponent was her legal training. She knew how to build a case, how to present evidence, and how to cross-examine hostile witnesses. She also had something many politicians lacked: genuine passion for the issues she fought for, rooted in her own experiences growing up in communities affected by the policies she now worked to change. This wasn't just another cable news interview. For O'Reilly, it was a chance to reassert his dominance and prove he could still take down rising Democratic stars. He needed wins like this to maintain his relevance in the conservative media ecosystem and justify his continued presence on shows like Newsmax. For Crockett, the interview represented both opportunity and danger. A good performance could elevate her national profile and establish her as a serious player in Democratic politics. A poor showing could reinforce stereotypes about young politicians being unprepared for prime time. The broader stakes were even higher. This confrontation represented a clash between the old guard of conservative media, represented by O'Reilly's generation of aggressive male hosts, and the new generation of diverse Democratic politicians who refused to be intimidated or talked over. The setting was Newsmax's main studio, with its red, white, and blue backdrop designed to evoke American patriotism. The lighting was harsh, designed to put guests on edge. O'Reilly sat behind his familiar desk setup, while Crockett was positioned slightly lower in a guest chair, a subtle power dynamic that most viewers wouldn't consciously notice, but which reinforced the host's authority. Both participants had their game faces on. O'Reilly's research folder was thick with opposition research and attack lines. Crockett's phone was nearby, loaded with her own receipts and evidence that she might need to reference. Neither realized how dramatically the next 20 minutes would shift both of their trajectories. The interview started exactly as O'Reilly's producers had planned. After a brief introduction, O'Reilly wasted no time launching into his attack strategy. His years of experience had taught him that the best way to control an interview was to put the guest on the defensive immediately. "Congresswoman Crockett," O'Reilly began, his voice taking on the patronizing tone that had made him famous. "You've been in Congress for less than 2 years, and already you're positioning yourself as some kind of expert on everything from criminal justice to foreign policy. What exactly qualifies you to lecture the American people on these complex issues?" The question was designed to be a trap. If Crockett defended her qualifications, she would sound arrogant. If she appeared humble, O'Reilly would paint her as inexperienced and unfit for office. It was a classic double-bind that had worked countless times before. Crockett started to respond, but O'Reilly immediately interrupted. Another signature move from his playbook. "Before you answer that," he continued, "let me point out that your biggest accomplishment before Congress was being a trial lawyer in Dallas. And we all know what trial lawyers are. Ambulance chasers looking to make a quick buck off other people's misery." The personal attack drew a few uncomfortable chuckles from the studio crew. O'Reilly was clearly enjoying himself, settling into the rhythm that had made him a conservative media icon for decades. "And let's talk about your voting record," O'Reilly pressed on, not giving Crockett space to respond. "You voted with Nancy Pelosi and the radical left wing of your party 97% of the time. You're basically a rubber stamp for the most extreme elements of the Democratic Party. How is that representing the people of Texas?" O'Reilly had done his homework, at least superficially. He rattled off a series of statistics and voting records designed to paint Crockett as an extremist out of touch with her constituents. His voice grew more animated as he built what he thought was an overwhelming case against her. "Your district has serious problems. Crime, poverty, infrastructure issues. But instead of focusing on those bread-and-butter concerns, you spend your time on Twitter making inflammatory statements about law enforcement and pushing radical policies that would bankrupt the country," O'Reilly continued. "Take your position on police funding. For example, you've consistently opposed giving law enforcement the resources they need to keep communities safe. Meanwhile, crime rates in urban areas are skyrocketing. How do you justify that to the families who are afraid to leave their homes at night?" The attack was comprehensive and well-rehearsed. O'Reilly had clearly spent time crafting talking points designed to make Crockett look irresponsible and extreme. He was using every trick in the conservative media playbook, taking votes out of context, cherry-picking statistics, and framing complex policy positions in the most negative possible light. But O'Reilly wasn't content to limit his attacks to policy differences. As the interview continued, his comments became increasingly personal and condescending. This was where his old-school approach began to show its age, the kind of dismissive attitude toward younger politicians, particularly women of color, that had become less acceptable in modern media. "Look, Congresswoman," O'Reilly said, his tone now openly dismissive, "I've been covering politics longer than you've been alive. I've interviewed presidents, prime ministers, and world leaders. I've seen countless young politicians come through Washington thinking they're going to change the world, and most of them flame out within a few years. The ageism in his comments was obvious, but O'Reilly pressed forward. "You represent everything that's wrong with today's Democratic Party. All passion and Twitter followers, but no real substance or practical experience. You're great at viral moments and sound bites, but governing requires more than social media savvy. As O'Reilly continued his assault, the generational and cultural divides became increasingly apparent. His references were dated. He kept mentioning Twitter instead of X, talked about young people today in ways that sounded like a grandfather complaining about kids on his lawn, and used language that felt increasingly out of touch. Your generation thinks that because you can get a hashtag trending, that means you understand how the world works, O'Reilly continued. But hashtags don't create jobs. Viral videos don't improve infrastructure. Social media followers don't negotiate with foreign leaders or pass meaningful legislation. Throughout this barrage, Crockett remained composed. She took notes on a small pad, occasionally nodding as if she were a lawyer listening to an opposing counsel's opening statement. Her calm demeanor seemed to frustrate O'Reilly, who was accustomed to guests becoming flustered under his aggressive questioning style. The studio crew began to sense something was different about this interview. Usually, by this point, O'Reilly's guests were either angrily defending themselves or looking overwhelmed by his rapid-fire attacks. Crockett's composed response suggested she had something planned. O'Reilly's final preparatory assault focused on what he saw as Crockett's lack of legislative achievements. "Let's talk about what you've actually accomplished in Congress," he said, his voice now dripping with contempt. "Can you name one significant piece of legislation that you've authored that has become law? One major policy victory that has improved the lives of your constituents? Because from where I sit, all I see is a lot of grandstanding. A lot of committee hearings where you ask gotcha questions designed to go viral, and a lot of press releases about issues you have no real power to solve. You're basically a professional activist who somehow got elected to Congress." The insult was clear and personal. O'Reilly was essentially calling Crockett a fraud, someone who had fooled voters into electing her despite having no real qualifications or accomplishments. It was the kind of dismissive attack that had worked for him countless times before, particularly against younger politicians who might be intimidated by his reputation and aggressive style. But as O'Reilly finished his attack and leaned back in his chair with a satisfied smirk, he had no idea that he had just walked directly into the trap Crockett had been preparing for him. The Congresswoman looked down at her notes one final time, then looked directly into the camera with the confidence of someone who was about to turn the entire interview on its head. The moment of reckoning had arrived. Jasmine Crockett sat in her chair, completely still for a moment that felt like an eternity. The silence was so complete that you could hear the hum of the studio lights. O'Reilly's smirk began to waver slightly as he realized something had shifted in the room's energy. When Crockett finally spoke, her voice was measured and calm, the voice of an attorney who had just heard the prosecution's case and was about to methodically dismantle every argument. "Mr. O'Reilly," she began, "I want to thank you for that comprehensive list of attacks. It's exactly what I expected from someone who clearly did the bare minimum research before this interview. The first shot was subtle, but precise." By suggesting O'Reilly hadn't done his homework, she was questioning his professionalism, something that would sting a veteran journalist who prided himself on preparation. "You asked about my qualifications," Crockett continued, her voice gaining strength. "Let me help you with some facts that apparently didn't make it into your research folder. Before Congress, I wasn't just a trial lawyer in Dallas, as you so dismissively put it. I was a civil rights attorney who won landmark cases against police departments that violated citizens' constitutional rights." She paused, letting that sink in. "I represented families whose loved ones were killed by police officers who faced no consequences. I fought against voter suppression laws that were designed to keep people who look like me from participating in democracy. And I won those cases, Mr. O'Reilly, in court, against teams of expensive lawyers hired by powerful institutions." The shift in tone was dramatic. Suddenly, O'Reilly wasn't dealing with a rookie politician he could steamroll. He was facing an experienced litigator who knew how to present evidence and build a case. "You want to talk about accomplishments? Let's talk about the $2.3 million settlement I secured for the family of Marcus Johnson, an unarmed black man who was shot 7 times in the back by Dallas police officers. That settlement didn't just provide justice for one family. It forced the Dallas Police Department to implement new training protocols that have prevented similar tragedies. Crockett was just getting started. Like a prosecutor presenting evidence to a jury, she began methodically dismantling O'Reilly's attacks with specific facts and figures. "You mentioned my voting record and claimed I vote with the radical left 97% of the time," she said, pulling out her phone. That statistic is from a Heritage Foundation study that only counted votes on bills they predetermined were liberal. It's a completely meaningless number designed to mislead people who don't bother to check the source. She looked directly at O'Reilly. "The reality is that I've co-sponsored 23 bipartisan bills in my first term, including legislation to combat veteran homelessness that was signed into law with support from both parties. I've worked across the aisle on infrastructure projects that have brought millions of federal dollars to Texas. But those accomplishments don't fit your narrative, do they?" O'Reilly tried to interrupt, but Crockett held up a hand. "I'm not finished. You had your time to speak without interruption. Now it's mine." The rebuke was firm, but professional, and it clearly caught O'Reilly off guard. He was used to controlling the flow of his interviews. But Crockett had seized control with the confidence of someone who had cross-examined hostile witnesses in courtrooms across Texas. "You called me an ambulance chaser earlier," Crockett continued, her voice taking on an edge. That's interesting language from someone who settled multiple sexual harassment lawsuits for millions of dollars and had to leave his primetime show in disgrace. The attack was surgical. By mentioning O'Reilly's well-documented history of sexual harassment allegations, Crockett had turned the tables completely. Suddenly, questions about professional conduct and character were on the table. But now they were being directed at him. "If we're going to talk about ethics and qualifications, let's have that conversation," Crockett pressed on. "I've never had to pay anyone to stay quiet about my behavior. I've never been accused of creating a hostile work environment. I've never had to settle lawsuits alleging that I abused my position of power, but Crockett was building to something bigger. Her legal training had taught her that the most effective cross-examinations ended with the witness impeaching themselves with their own words. And she had found exactly what she needed. "You know what's really interesting, Mr. O'Reilly? Earlier in this interview, you said that governing requires more than social media savvy and viral moments. You said that hashtags don't create jobs, and that real leadership requires practical experience." She paused, looking directly into the camera. Those are strong words from someone who was forced to resign from the most watched cable news show in America because he couldn't figure out how to interact with female colleagues without getting sued. The studio fell completely silent. Even the camera operators stopped moving. "But here's the quote I really want to share," Crockett continued, her voice now commanding the complete attention of everyone in the room. "Last month you were on a podcast talking about the importance of accountability in leadership. You said, and I'm quoting directly, anyone who abuses their position of power, who uses their platform to harm others, who thinks they can get away with bad behavior because they're famous or powerful, those people have no business lecturing others about morality or leadership." The silence that followed was deafening. Crockett had just used O'Reilly's own words to indict him. And everyone in the room knew it. So by your own standards, Mr. O'Reilly, what business do you have lecturing anyone about qualifications, character, or leadership? For the first time in decades of television interviews, Bill O'Reilly was speechless. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. The man who had built his career on never backing down from a fight, on always having the last word, on dominating every conversation, had been completely neutralized. You're taking that completely out of context," he finally stammered, but his voice lacked any conviction. The fight had gone out of him completely. Crockett leaned forward slightly. "Am I? Because it sounds to me like you were being remarkably honest about the standards we should hold public figures to. The only question is whether you're willing to apply those same standards to yourself. O'Reilly's face had gone red. His hands were shaking slightly as he gripped his notes. This was supposed to be his interview, his show, his moment to demolish another young Democrat. Instead, he was being systematically destroyed by someone he had underestimated. But Crockett wasn't done. She had saved the best for last. "You want to talk about my legislative record? Fine. Let me tell you about the Jasmine Crockett Criminal Justice Reform Act, which passed the House last month with bipartisan support. It provides funding for police departments to implement de-escalation training while also creating accountability measures for officers who violate citizens' rights. She was speaking directly to the camera now, completely ignoring O'Reilly. It's the kind of common-sense legislation that improves public safety while protecting civil rights. The kind of governing that requires more than viral moments. It requires the ability to bring people together and find solutions. But you wouldn't know about that. Mr. O'Reilly, because you didn't bother to research my actual record. You just read some opposition research talking points and assumed you could intimidate me like you've intimidated so many others over the years. The final sentence was delivered with devastating calm. The difference between us is that I actually accomplish things. You just talk about other people who do. The studio crew was stunned. In all their years of working television, they had never seen anything like what they had just witnessed. A 33-year-old Congresswoman had just systematically destroyed one of the most feared interviewers in conservative media using nothing but facts, preparation, and his own words. O'Reilly made one last desperate attempt to regain control. Look, Congresswoman, I think you're mischaracterizing. I'm not mischaracterizing anything, Crockett cut him off firmly. I'm holding you to the same standards you claim to hold everyone else to. If that makes you uncomfortable, maybe you should ask yourself why. The interview was effectively over. O'Reilly's producer was already signaling from behind the camera that they needed to go to commercial break. The host, who had once dominated cable news, had been reduced to a stammering, defensive shell of his former self. As the show cut to commercial, the real fireworks were just beginning. Social media was already exploding with clips of Crockett's devastating takedown, and the quote that had left O'Reilly speechless was spreading like wildfire across every platform. Within 60 seconds of the interview ending, Crockett destroys O'Reilly was trending on Twitter X. The clip of her devastating quote, "The difference between us is that I actually accomplish things. You just talk about other people who do," had already been viewed over 100,000 times and was climbing rapidly. The speed of the viral spread was unprecedented. Political junkies, legal professionals, and ordinary Americans who rarely paid attention to cable news interviews were sharing the video with comments like, "Holy shit, and she just ended his whole career again." A prominent Democratic strategist with 800,000 followers tweeted, "Jasmine Crockett just gave a masterclass in how to handle bad faith interviews. She came prepared, stayed calm, and used the interviewer's own words against him. This is what effective communication looks like." Conservative commentator Tomi Lahren, no friend to Democrats, couldn't help but acknowledge the skill she had witnessed. I disagree with Crockett on basically everything. But that was a clinic in interview preparation. O'Reilly got schooled by someone who actually did her homework. The internet's meme creators worked with lightning speed. Within 2 hours, dozens of memes had flooded social media. A split-screen image showing O'Reilly's confident smirk at the beginning of the interview next to his stunned, speechless face at the end, captioned how it started versus how it ended. A photo of Crockett with the caption, "When you bring receipts to a feelings fight." A mock movie poster titled "Destroyed by Facts and Logic," featuring Crockett as an action hero standing over a defeated O'Reilly. A gif of O'Reilly's mouth opening and closing with no sound, paired with the caption, "When you realize you played yourself." The most popular meme showed Crockett calmly reading from her phone, while O'Reilly looked increasingly panicked in the background. The caption read, "POV, you thought you were interviewing a rookie, but she's actually a trained attorney who came prepared." Legal professionals were particularly impressed by Crockett's performance. The National Bar Association tweeted, "This is what happens when a skilled litigator applies courtroom tactics to a media interview." Congresswoman Crockett demonstrated the power of preparation, evidence-based arguments, and staying calm under pressure. Several law schools announced they would be using clips from the interview in their trial advocacy courses as examples of effective cross-examination techniques adapted for media appearances. A retired federal judge commented on LinkedIn, "I've seen thousands of attorneys in my courtroom over 30 years. Very few could have handled that hostile interview with the composure and strategic thinking that Congresswoman Crockett displayed. She turned what was supposed to be an ambush into a tutorial on effective advocacy." The response from conservative media was swift but scattered. Many outlets simply ignored the interview entirely, hoping it would fade from public attention quickly. Others tried to spin it as evidence that Crockett was too aggressive or disrespectful to her elders. Fox News ran a segment titled, "Is this the new face of Democratic extremism?" But the hosts seemed uncomfortable even as they tried to criticize Crockett's performance. One admitted, "Look, she clearly came prepared and made some effective points." But Sean Hannity, O'Reilly's former Fox News colleague, tried to defend him on his radio show. Bill O'Reilly is a veteran journalist who has contributed enormously to conservative media. One difficult interview doesn't erase decades of important work, but even some conservative commentators couldn't bring themselves to fully defend O'Reilly's performance. "He walked into that one," admitted a writer for the National Review. You can't go after someone's qualifications without expecting them to come back at yours. Behind the scenes at Newsmax, executives were in full crisis mode. The network had invested heavily in O'Reilly's credibility and reputation as a tough interviewer who could take on any liberal politician. His complete destruction by a relatively unknown Congresswoman threatened to undermine that brand. Internal emails later leaked to media reporters showed the panic within the network. One producer wrote, "We can't let him do live interviews anymore without extensive prep." This was a disaster. Another executive responded, "The problem isn't prep. The problem is that he underestimated his opponent and walked into a buzzsaw." Crockett isn't some random Twitter politician. She's a trained attorney who knows how to build a case and destroy hostile witnesses. Newsmax quietly cancelled O'Reilly's planned follow-up appearances for the rest of the week, citing scheduling conflicts. For Jasmine Crockett, the interview represented a breakthrough moment that transformed her from a rising Democratic star into a national political force. Her office reported receiving over 10,000 messages of support within 24 hours, including inquiries from major donors and requests for speaking engagements from across the country. Democratic leadership took notice immediately. House Speaker Hakeem Jeffries called Crockett personally to congratulate her on her performance. "You showed the country what effective leadership looks like," he told her, according to sources close to the conversation. More importantly, the interview had demonstrated that Crockett possessed the skills necessary to go toe-to-toe with hostile media and win. This was crucial for any politician with national ambitions, particularly in an era where conservative media interviews were considered essential rites of passage. Analysts recognized that Crockett's performance represented a new model for how Democrats could handle hostile interviews. For years, many Democratic politicians had struggled in conservative media appearances, either avoiding them entirely or appearing defensive and unprepared. Crockett showed that the key isn't to avoid these interviews, explained a former Obama administration communications director. The key is to come prepared with your own offensive strategy instead of just playing defense. She turned O'Reilly's attack into an opportunity to make her own case. Political science professors began incorporating the interview into their courses on political communication. This is a case study in how preparation, message discipline, and tactical thinking can overcome even the most hostile interview environment, noted a professor at Georgetown University's School of Public Policy. For Bill O'Reilly, the interview represented perhaps the most damaging moment of his post-Fox News career. The man who had built his reputation on never backing down from a fight had been reduced to stammering defensiveness by a politician half his age. Conservative media insiders were brutal in their private assessments. Bill's whole brand was being the guy who could dominate any interview, one longtime producer explained anonymously. When you get destroyed like that, especially by someone you clearly underestimated, it raises questions about whether you still have it. O'Reilly's booking agency reported several cancelled appearances in the days following the interview. Potential hosts were apparently concerned about the optics of bringing on someone who had just been so thoroughly embarrassed on television. Beyond the immediate viral moment, political strategists recognized that Crockett's performance had broader implications for how politicians approach media appearances. Her success in using O'Reilly's own words against him demonstrated the importance of opposition research and strategic thinking in media encounters. She didn't just defend herself, noted a veteran. Democratic campaign manager. She went on a fence and used his own standards to expose his hypocrisy. That's advanced-level political communication that most politicians never master. Republican strategists privately admitted that Crockett had raised the bar for media preparation. "We can't assume that young Democrats are going to be easy targets anymore," one GOP consultant acknowledged. This interview showed that some of them are coming prepared to fight back effectively. The interview also captured a broader cultural moment about generational change in American politics. The sight of a young black woman systematically dismantling an older white male media figure resonated with many Americans who were tired of seeing politicians bullied by hostile interviewers. "This wasn't just about politics," wrote a cultural critic for The Atlantic. "It was about competence versus bluster, preparation versus assumption, and substance versus reputation." Crockett represented the future, informed, prepared, and unintimidated by traditional power structures. The interview became required viewing in college political science courses and high school debate clubs. Teachers used it to demonstrate the importance of research, logical argumentation, and maintaining composure under pressure. The viral success of the interview translated into concrete political benefits for Crockett. Her campaign fundraising exploded, with small-dollar donations pouring in from across the country. Her email list grew by over 50,000 subscribers in the week following the interview. More importantly, the interview had established Crockett as a serious political figure capable of handling the biggest stages and toughest opponents. Speaking requests from major Democratic events flooded in, and national media outlets began reaching out for her perspective on major issues. "This is what happens when preparation meets opportunity," Crockett told reporters the day after the interview. "I knew exactly who I was dealing with and what I needed to do. The lesson for other politicians is simple. Do your homework, know your facts, and never let anyone bully you into backing down from the truth." Months later, the interview continued to be referenced as a watershed moment in political communication. It had demonstrated that the old model of aggressive male interviewers steamrolling younger politicians was no longer viable when those politicians came prepared to fight back. For Jasmine Crockett, the interview had transformed her from a promising freshman Congresswoman into a national Democratic star with unlimited political potential. For Bill O'Reilly, it represented a harsh reminder that reputation and past success mean nothing when you underestimate your opponent and come unprepared to a battle of wits. The quote that had left the audience speechless: "The difference between us is that I actually accomplish things. You just talk about other people who do," became a rallying cry for politicians and activists across the country. It was printed on T-shirts, used in campaign speeches, and referenced in countless social media posts. But perhaps the most important legacy was the example it set for how to handle hostile media encounters with intelligence, preparation, and unwavering confidence. Jasmine Crockett had shown the world that with the right approach, even the most intimidating opponents could be defeated with facts, logic, and their own words. Thanks for watching this incredible political showdown where Jasmine Crockett absolutely demolished Bill O'Reilly with facts, preparation, and his own words. This is exactly why you need to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because moments like these happen fast, and you don't want to miss the next time a politician delivers a masterclass in how to handle hostile media. If you enjoyed seeing O'Reilly get schooled by someone who actually did her homework, smash that like button and let us know in the comments who you think Crockett should take on next. And don't forget to share this video with anyone who needs to see how effective political communication is really done. Which moment from this interview shocked you the most? Was it when Crockett used O'Reilly's own quote against him, or when she completely flipped the script on his attacks? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one, and your engagement helps us bring you more content like this. Subscribe now so you never miss these jaw-dropping political moments. And we'll see you in the next video where we break down the biggest political confrontations shaping America today.